You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Well, book written by P.J. O'Rourke entitled Eat the Rich. Well, there's a new book out called In Defense of Wealth by Derek Bullen. Derek, you are entrepreneur, wealth creator, and run a large professional company in Canada. Basically, your book, I guess, is the same premise as P.J. O'Rourke's Eat the Rich, which is like you can't just get rid of wealthy people and expect to have a positive outcome, can you?
Exactly. The rich are essential to everyone's prosperity. They're vital to our standard of living, and they're also essential in funding the government.
Yeah, very true. On the one hand, they are essential. On the other hand, I think what many of you out there object to, particularly what you've seen in the United States, is there's two systems, often perceived as being two systems, one for the rich, one for the poor. And that has less to do with the rich than the power of the rich, I guess.
Or the perceived, power of the rich. It's interesting because the rich aren't it's not like in times where there were kingdoms, and the king's children inherited the throne and then their children inherited the throne. Rich is a very fleeting concept because 70% of the billionaires alive today, 88% of the millionaires in America, made their money in their own time, in their lifetime, and made it from scratch. And so every generation has a new list of rich. If you look at the billionaires now, they weren't the billionaires we had in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. We're dealing with generally a new set, and it's very hard to inherit. So the rich could be any of us. It could be any of our children. You never know, who's going to be there. And it's an equal opportunity game. So I don't know why we demonize the rich as if it's a permanent establishment and a permanent group of people. And generally, people that are rich just worked really, really hard and were lucky that their idea, sold. Like someone like Steve Jobs, who I don't think he was a billionaire in his lifetime when he was alive. When he invented things like the iPhone, every transaction that happened, I think it benefited the buyer and it benefited the seller, which was Apple and the CEO of Apple was Steve Jobs. So it just happens that, when there's millions of buyers and only one seller, that seller for a period of time gets very, very wealthy. But most of that money is paid to others and most of it goes back to society. And I can talk more about that if you wish, Kerry.
Yeah, well, and I agree with you there. But the way the world is today, a lot of the wealthy got wealthy, not from coming up with a better iPhone, but actually from government largesse, from government privilege, from government intervention in the free market. And that, I think, is a large part of why there's so much resentment towards the so-called rich.
I think there are people like that, but that's not the norm. And most people, like if you think about Jeff Bezos and Amazon, that was a steady, long uphill climb. Even in 1999, after Amazon had been established, even Barron's ran a front page article saying online sales is silly, and they called it Amazon.bomb. So against all odds, Bezos brought Amazon. It wasn't through privilege or intervention or largesse. And Elon Musk, when he did PayPal, which he built up and he sold for $1 billion, there was no privilege, intervention, or largesse. Same thing for Salesforce.com, Microsoft. I mean, everybody, I think, when they run a large company, tries to optimize their company and do the best they can. And if you are a large company or a big union, or I don't know. If you want, you can always hire someone to lobby the government for your interests. But government policy and good business are two separate things. And really, we have to count on our politicians to take whatever they're being lobbied to make sure it makes sense and is for the betterment of society. But most billionaires and millionaires didn't get it by privilege, intervention, largesse, and in fact, most of them didn't get it by inheritance either.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And like you said, when you look at like the Forbes 500 and you compare it to 20 years ago, most of the names that were on the list 20 years ago are not on that list today.
Right. Like the musician Rihanna is on that list. She's a billionaire. LeBron James is now a billionaire. Michael Jordan, now a billionaire, and none of them had privilege, intervention, or largesse thrown their way. They just were very talented, worked at something very, very hard, and that's the rewards of their work. And by the way, it doesn't always work out. Like Blockbuster is now completely bankrupt, even though there was a time, when it was worth $5 billion, to all of its shareholders. And so it's not only a lot of work to make money, it's a lot of risk. It's not a guaranteed thing. It's not a surefire recipe that everybody who wants to can do it. And I think Rockefeller said it best. He said, if you start out and your only objective is to make money, you surely won't make a lot of money. You actually have to do something that has a purpose. I think America's first billionaire actually wasn't Rockefeller. Many people think it was Henry Ford. And if you think about it, Henry Ford didn't set out to become America's first billionaire. Henry Ford set out to make the automobile affordable for the average American. And through that, again, it was the same dynamic. There were lots of people who bought the automobile, only one person selling it at that price, at that consistency. And it made Henry Ford very wealthy, but that wasn't his objective.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And many of you out there who have gotten wealthy or have done quite well, you didn't necessarily start out saying, I want to get rich. You had an idea and you ran with it. But one thing that we have today that we didn't have 100 years ago, Derek, is a rapacious governmental sector that is anxious to suck up the wealth of anyone and everyone to finance its bloated operations. So it's a lot harder now because you're giving away 40-50% of what you make. You didn't have that back in the golden age of capitalism.
That is so true. And, Kerry, I don't know why everybody is so fixated on what Elon Musk spends his money on, and nobody's fixated on what the Biden administration or any of our politicians are spending all of our money on. The income tax this year is going to be record income tax in the United States. It's typically $1.6 trillion a year. This year, it's expected to be $2.4 billion or higher. I mean, some of the things that made it high is in anticipation of higher capital gains taxes from the government. Many people sold things of value to recognize that now. I think that's in the income tax rule. And as well, there was the all the subsidization payments from the government during the COVID disruption, and those are taxed. They're actually taxing their own handouts, but it's outrageous, like $2.4 trillion, and nobody's asking where our governments are spending that money. In the state of California, we all know there's more public sector workers than private sector workers, and it's the private sector that makes the majority of the money. But the other thing nobody knows is that the average wage of a public sector employee in California is double the average wage of a private sector employee in California, and it's the private sector ones that are making the money. So you're right. Like, where is the care, the scrutiny, and the discussion on what our governments are spending our money on? Because it just doesn't seem to stop. Kerry, when you get when a couple gets divorced, they lose, half their assets. And everybody's like, oh my God, I lost half of everything. Well, I didn't lose. We split it up and half went to him and half went to her. But nobody talks about that. If you're earning a good income in the United States, you're parting with almost half of your income every year. It's like getting a divorce every year for the high earners. And nobody thinks that's unusual. I think it's an unusually high taxation.
Yeah, and it's always, you're not paying your fair share. You should be doing more to help those in need. All these things that are done to guilt the wealthy into doing things. Hey, what about the concept of all of these wealthy people being, and I don't want to get into a political discussion with you. I don't know that that's productive, but it's always these wealthy people who think that you should be paying more in taxes, that it's okay for him or her to be taking their private jet to places like Davos. Well, they're begrudging you the ability to fill up your SUV, spend $150 doing that because you might be polluting the environment.
Don't just survive. Thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Torque Resources is an exploration company establishing a portfolio of premier copper gold early stage projects in Chile. Torque's management and technical teams have a strong track record of raising capital, discovery, and monetization of exploration successes. The company's Margarita Copper Gold project is located within the prolific coastal Cordillera Belt in Chile, which hosts some of the world's largest and most profitable copper mines. The Margarita project possesses excellent discovery potential for a major copper discovery due to the strength of the alteration system, large-scale magnetic targets, and the presence of copper oxide mineralization. Drilling is anticipated to begin in Q3 of this year. Torque trades in Canada under TORQ and on the OTC under TRBMF. To learn more, go to torqueresources.com. That's torqueresources.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network. The information you need to thrive. Now more than ever.
The hypocrisy of the woke left in politics is almost superhuman at this point in time. It's so interesting. The Biden administration really put a chilling effect on the energy industry in the United States. And the United States is the world's largest economy. It's 30% of the world's economy is the United States. And the number one moneymaker for the United States is petroleum products, refined petroleum products. And for the Biden administration to say we're putting a cap on that, so many people have left that sector, and the production's down. Energy prices for the average American, with all of the we're getting green energy, solar, wind. Turbines, it's still up 11% this year. There's not cheaper energy, there's more expensive energy. And when you look at, global security, you have to say, why are we still buying oil products from nations that have significant human rights violations or are invading other nations? And I'm thinking of Russia, I'm thinking of Saudi Arabia, I'm thinking of Venezuela, and yet we diminish our own, domestic capacity. You're right. This whole thing, like fly to Davos in a jet, that's your own jet, and at the same time tell everybody that they have to be paying record prices for oil at the pump for the average family. It's just ridiculous. And even the energy prices, like the ethanol grants, say let's distill corn and put bio-made fuels in our gasoline. It's ramping up the price of feedstock for people that grow chickens, for us to eat. And it's going to make eggs, poultry, other meats more expensive because we're subsidizing it to be used in fuel instead of used in our food. And if you look at, those among us who are least capable to handle rising fuel costs, for your vehicle, for heating your home, and rising food costs, to feed your family, the policies by the Biden administration, especially around energy, are actually moving the needle the wrong way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's always the people who are supposedly the best intention that want to do the most for the poor that always wind up hurting them the most. And there's a certain irony to that, isn't there? There
is. And, Kerry, this slogan that the Biden administration keeps bannering about, like pay your fair share, it's on purpose. It's very vague. On purpose, it's very pejorative. It's shaming and demeaning. And it's not there to really shame the 1%. It's really there as a virtue signaling for people who think it's very popular to say the rich are taking money from everybody. That's very popular. And politicians know the 1% can't vote them in office. They know the 1% can't vote them out of office. And they know that the 1% subsidizes 40% of the government income tax. The 1% in America pays 40% of the income taxes. In 2021, the first 57% of workers paid no income tax and they got a free ride. So fair share is that, like, what number do you want the 1% to pay for? Because they're currently paying for 40% of all the taxes. Does the Biden administration want them to pay for 50, 60, 70? I mean, they're not being specific. And by the way, they won't raise taxes on the 1%, because then the 1% will leave. That's what's happening in California. California is gifting hundreds of billions of dollars on a regular basis to the state of Texas, the state of California, Arizona, and Nevada, as wealthy Californians are relocating not only themselves, but their businesses. And it doesn't mean they can't still keep a house in California. It just means where they pay tax and where they declare their principal residence will be another state. So Elon Musk moved, and last year he paid $12 billion in taxes, and it went to the benefit of the greater United States for federal tax and the state of Texas. No taxes to none of that largesse went to California. And his Gigafactory, his SpaceX factory, all in Texas. Larry Ellison relocated Oracle, the world's second largest software company, to Austin, Texas. Airbnb is moving out of California and they're going to Atlanta, and Disney's moving at some of its highest paid Imagineers out of California because their staff are finding the taxes too punitive. And that's what happens when you raise taxes too much. People leave.
Hey, so the way you're speaking here, Derek, you sound like you're a real fan of Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, my goodness. You know,
I'm being a little sarcastic, a little bit sarcastic.
Yeah. But, you know, millennials and Gen Z in a survey think that capitalism and socialism are equally viable constructs to run a nation on. You know, and this, we're going to redistribute the wealth message plays well with you know, young kids that, you know, when you're living at home, your formative years, you don't have to pay much for room and board, you know, because your parents pay for it.
Right.
And then when you graduate school, it's like, well, wouldn't it be great if instead of my parents paying for everything, the government would just pay for everything? And some people during the COVID pandemic experienced that, where they got checks from the government for not doing anything. And they think that's going to work. And what they don't teach at school is what happens when you get socialism. When you get socialism, people starve, people die, and the majority of the population ends up living below the poverty line. So Hugo Chavez was socialist, brought in because he was going to distribute the wealth, make everybody pay their fair share, and he nationalized the large industries like oil, like the energy industry in Venezuela. And today, 90% of Venezuelans live below the poverty line. And then China, when Nixon visited China and then Xiaoping visited the United States, the Chinese leader could not believe the prosperity in the United States. And he was like, I'm all for getting a little of this in China, because they had just gone through tens of millions of people dying through their cultural revolution, and 88% of the Chinese population was living below the poverty line. They set up special economic zones, and there's several in China today. I think there's 20 of them. And they're economic zones where capitalism can work. You can, in that economic zone, you can have a company, you can make money, you can own real estate. Each one is a little American microsystem inside China. And today, China's second on the planet for billionaires, and less than 2% of the Chinese population live below the poverty line. So the reverse happened in China. They brought capitalism in, created special zones inside their socialist state for it, and it brought everybody out of poverty. And if you go from 1980, when there's 13 billionaires on the planet, to today, where there's about 2,755, 15 billionaires, 44% of the population is living below the poverty line. Today, 2,755 billionaires, and less than 24% of the population is living below the poverty line, and it still continues downward. Rich people don't make money off of other people. Rich people make money for everybody, and less among us are poor.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think we'll leave it at that. Derek, just tell us the book, where we find it. I assume wherever fine books used to be sold.
Kerry, thank you. So the book is called In Defense of Wealth. It was a #1 bestseller on the Wall Street Journal for nonfiction in 1 week in April. It's on Amazon.com. And I spelled defense the Canadian way. I didn't realize there were 2 ways to spell it. So it's DEFENCE. But if you're on Amazon and you search my last name, Bullen, and you search a keyword wealth, you'll get In Defense of Wealth. It'll come up, and it's ebooks, hardcover, and audiobook.
All right, excellent. And there's a link to that in the show notes to this interview on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. And hey, why don't you send me an email? We'll get you an answer from Derek, KL@KerryLutz.com. Derek, absolute pleasure. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Kerry.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.